August 15, 1963, Phoenix, Arizona. The heavy crystal vase left my hands with every ounce of strength I possessed. It struck Douglas square in the forehead with a sound I will never forget. A dull thud followed by the sharp crack of breaking glass. He toppled backward onto our hallway floor like a felled tree blood immediately pooling beneath his head. For exactly 4 seconds, I thought I had killed my stepfather. My hands trembled violently as I stared at his motionless body. My broken nose throbbed with each rapid heartbeat, and blood from my face dripped onto my torn white blouse. But I didn't have time to check if Douglas was breathing. "Emma," I screamed, running up the stairs 3 at a time. "We have to leave right now." My 8-year-old sister sat up in her bed, rubbing her eyes in confusion. When she saw my bloodied face and the terror in my expression, she immediately started crying. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "Douglas hurt me, and he was going to hurt you too," I said, grabbing her clothes and stuffing them into a pillowcase with shaking hands. "We're climbing out your window and going to Mrs. Patterson's house. She'll call the police." As we prepared to escape through Emma's bedroom window, I heard Douglas groaning from downstairs. We had maybe 90 seconds before he recovered consciousness and came after us. This moment of desperate escape, when I chose to fight back against a dangerous man to protect my little sister, began 14 months earlier with what my mother believed was a miracle. My name is Sarah Mitchell Thompson, and I am 78 years old today as I write this memoir. I have spent the past 35 years running the Crisis Support Center in Tucson, Arizona, helping families escape domestic violence. But in June 1962, I was just a 15-year-old girl trying to hold my family together after my father's tragic death. Robert Mitchell. My father had been killed in a construction accident 18 months earlier when a poorly maintained crane collapsed at his job site. The accident left my mother, Helen Mitchell, struggling to support Emma and me on her meager salary from Henderson's clothing factory in Phoenix. Our daily routine was exhausting, but predictable. Mother worked 12-hour shifts 6 days a week, earning barely enough to pay rent on our modest house on Maple Street. I took care of 8-year-old Emma every afternoon, helping with her homework, preparing simple dinners from whatever groceries we could afford, and making sure she was bathed and ready for bed before Mother returned home at 8:30 each evening. Emma was a sweet child with golden curls and bright green eyes, who loved drawing pictures of horses and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian someday. I was fiercely protective of her, especially after seeing how our father's death had shattered our family's sense of security and financial stability. On June 12, 1962, Mother met Douglas Warner at a church social event organized by St. Mary's Catholic Church. Douglas appeared to be exactly what our struggling family needed. A 42-year-old widower who worked as a supervisor at Copper Canyon Mine and earned good money. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair and a deep, commanding voice that made people listen when he spoke. Douglas began visiting our house regularly, always bringing thoughtful gifts. He brought red roses for Mother, chocolate candy for Emma and me, and once a small transistor radio that we could listen to while doing homework. Without being asked, he repaired our broken kitchen faucet and painted our backyard fence during weekend visits. Mother smiled more during those early weeks than she had since Father's death. She would hum while cooking dinner and spend extra time styling her hair before Douglas arrived. "He's a good man, Sarah," Mother told me one evening as we washed dishes after Douglas had left for the night. "He wants to take care of us properly. We desperately need that security, honey. We can't keep living paycheck to paycheck forever." I agreed that Douglas seemed helpful and generous, but something about him made me feel uneasy in ways I couldn't articulate. He stared at Emma and me when he thought no one was looking, and his compliments about our appearance felt inappropriate for a man speaking to children. When I mentioned these concerns to Mother, she dismissed them immediately. "You're simply not accustomed to having a man around the house again," she said, scrubbing a plate with unnecessary force. "Douglas is trying to be a father figure to you girls. You need to give him a fair chance, Sarah." Mother married Douglas Warner on August 18, 1962, just 2 months and 6 days after meeting him. The ceremony was small and held in our living room with only Douglas's brother Marcus as his witness, plus 3 neighbors as ours. Douglas moved into our house that same afternoon, bringing 2 leather suitcases and a heavy wooden trunk that he immediately carried down to our basement. The first month of their marriage seemed genuinely peaceful. Douglas gave Mother money to buy new clothes and better food than we had eaten since Father died. He purchased a red bicycle with white streamers for Emma and gave me a weekly allowance of $2 for helping with household chores. Mother appeared happier and more relaxed than she had been in nearly 2 years. But I observed troubling details that Mother either missed completely or chose to ignore. Douglas received mail twice weekly that he read quickly before burning the letters in our backyard fire pit. These letters consistently made him angry. I could see his jaw muscles clench and his hands shake as he read them. When I asked about this correspondence, he said it involved business matters from the mine that didn't concern children. Douglas also consumed alcohol far more than Mother realized. He kept a bottle of whiskey hidden behind our water heater in the basement, and I could smell liquor on his breath, even at breakfast sometimes. When Mother worked late shifts on Thursdays and Fridays, Douglas would disappear into the basement for hours, returning with bloodshot eyes and unsteady movements. Most concerning was how Douglas looked at Emma. His eyes would follow her movements across rooms, and he found unnecessary excuses to touch her shoulder or pat her head. Emma didn't seem to notice this inappropriate attention, but I began watching Douglas carefully whenever he was near my sister. Then came the morning that changed everything. On September 18, 1962, I found a plain white envelope slipped under our front door with no return address. The envelope was addressed simply to the Mitchell family in careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that made my blood run cold. Douglas Warner is not who he claims to be. His real name is Douglas Brennan. He served 4 years in Arizona State Prison for sexually abusing a child. He targets single mothers with young daughters. Please protect your children. Check his criminal record. This is not a joke or a prank. A mother who learned too late. I stared at the letter for several minutes, reading it over and over. My hands trembled as I tried to process what this meant. Was this some cruel hoax meant to destroy Mother's happiness? Or was Douglas truly dangerous? When Mother came home from work that evening, I showed her the anonymous letter. Her reaction was immediate and angry. "This is disgusting," she said, crumpling the paper in her fist. "Some jealous person wants to destroy our family's happiness. Douglas is a good man who loves us. I won't let some anonymous coward ruin what we've built together." But I couldn't dismiss the letter so easily. That night, after everyone was asleep, I smoothed out the crumpled paper and read it again by flashlight. The handwriting looked feminine, and the tone suggested genuine desperation rather than malicious intent. Someone had taken considerable risk to warn us about Douglas. I began watching Douglas even more carefully after receiving the letter. I noticed that he avoided discussing his past beyond vague references to working in various places before coming to Phoenix. When Emma or I asked about his previous job or where he had lived before, he would change the subject quickly. More troubling were Douglas's interactions with Emma. He had begun offering to help her with homework, suggesting they work together in his basement workshop where they wouldn't be disturbed. He also volunteered to give Emma baths when Mother worked late, claiming it would be more efficient than having me supervise her. I made sure Emma was never alone with Douglas for more than a few minutes. When he offered to help with her homework, I insisted on being present. When he suggested giving her baths, I firmly told him that I would continue handling Emma's bedtime routine. Douglas's response to my interference was subtle, but unmistakable hostility. He would glare at me when Mother wasn't looking, and his voice became cold when he spoke directly to me. "Sarah seems to have trust issues with men," Douglas told Mother one evening when he thought I couldn't hear. "Perhaps she needs to speak with someone about accepting change in the family structure." On October 3, 1962, exactly 3 weeks after the anonymous letter arrived, I started keeping a detailed notebook documenting Douglas's behavior. I wrote down dates and times when he drank alcohol, instances when he made inappropriate comments about Emma's appearance, and occasions when he tried to be alone with her. I also began researching how to check someone's criminal record. The public library downtown had reference materials about legal proceedings, and I learned that criminal records were public information available through the county courthouse. But as a 15-year-old, I wasn't sure how to access these records without adult assistance. The anonymous letter had planted seeds of doubt that grew stronger each day. Whoever had written it knew specific details about Douglas that weren't common knowledge. They mentioned his real name and his prison sentence with the confidence of someone who had personal experience with his criminal behavior. I decided to keep watching, documenting, and protecting Emma while trying to gather more information about Douglas's past. I had no way of knowing that the woman who wrote that letter, Margaret Flores, was watching our house from her car, praying that her warning would save another little girl from the hell her daughter Regina had endured. The first time Douglas hit me was on Thursday, October 11th, 1962, at exactly 7:15 in the evening. I remember the precise time because I was listening to the radio while washing dishes when the evening news began. Douglas came home from work, clearly intoxicated. His speech was slurred, and he stumbled against furniture as he moved through our house. The smell of whiskey was so strong I could detect it from 6 feet away. "Whoa, where's dinner?" he demanded, leaning heavily against our kitchen counter. "I made a casserole. It's staying warm in the oven," I replied, not turning around from the sink where I was scrubbing a pot. "You didn't answer my real question," Douglas said, his voice becoming dangerous. "Where is your mother, and why isn't she here taking care of her husband?" "She's working a double shift. She won't be home until after 10 tonight." Before I could explain further about the casserole, Douglas grabbed my left arm and spun me around to face him. His grip was painfully tight. I could feel his fingers digging into my skin, hard enough to leave bruises. "You think you run this house, don't you?" He set his face inches from mine. His breath reeked of alcohol and cigarettes. "Walking around here like you're the woman of the house. Well, I'm the man here now, and you'll show me proper respect." I tried to pull my arm free, which only increased his anger. His right hand struck my face so hard that I fell backward against the kitchen counter, knocking over a glass of water that shattered on the floor. The slap made a sharp cracking sound that seemed to echo through our house. My left cheek burned with pain, and I could taste blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. I stared at Douglas in shock, unable to speak. "Don't even think about telling your mother," he said, pointing his finger at my face while I stood frozen against the counter. "She won't believe you anyway, and if you cause problems in this marriage, your family will end up homeless. Do you understand me?" I nodded silently, tears streaming down my face. Douglas turned and walked toward the basement stairs to continue drinking. I heard Emma's bedroom door creak open upstairs. "Sarah, are you okay? I heard something break," Emma called down. "I'm fine," I called back quickly, wiping my eyes. "Just dropped a glass. Finish your homework." That night, after Mother returned home and went to sleep, I lay awake planning how to protect Emma and myself. I couldn't tell Mother what had happened. Douglas was probably right that she wouldn't believe me, and we truly had nowhere else to go. But I could prepare for future incidents. I expanded my notebook documentation to include every act of violence and every threat Douglas made. I also began saving small amounts of money from my allowance in a glass jar buried behind our garden shed, thinking we might need emergency funds someday. Over the following months, Douglas's violent behavior escalated in both frequency and severity. He would explode into rage over trivial issues. Emma leaving her shoes in the living room, me spending more than 5 minutes in the bathroom, Mother serving dinner even slightly late because of work delays. His physical punishments were always calculated to avoid visible injuries. He hit me across the back with his leather belt when I received a C- grade on a geometry test. He slapped Emma's face when she accidentally spilled milk on our kitchen table. He squeezed Mother's wrist so hard it left purple fingerprint bruises when she questioned him about money he had spent without discussion. After each violent incident, Douglas would become apologetic and generous for several days. He would bring home flowers, cook elaborate dinners, or give Emma and me small gifts. He told Mother he was experiencing tremendous stress at work and promised his anger wouldn't happen again. Mother, desperate to maintain family stability and terrified of facing single parenthood again, believed his apologies every time. Marriage requires patience and understanding. Mother told me after Douglas had bruised her arm during an argument about grocery expenses. Sometimes good men make mistakes when they're under pressure. Douglas loves us, Sarah. He's doing his best to be a good husband and stepfather. By March 1963, I had documented over 30 incidents of violence, threats, or inappropriate behavior in my notebook. I had also collected physical evidence, photographs of bruises I took with Mother's camera, a torn piece of my shirt from when Douglas grabbed me, and detailed descriptions of his drinking patterns. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come, and it would arrive through Douglas's own brother. Marcus Warner, Douglas's younger brother, had been a regular visitor to our house since the wedding. He appeared to be everything Douglas was not: gentle, soft-spoken, and genuinely interested in Emma's schoolwork and my plans for the future. Marcus worked as a mechanic at a downtown garage and seemed like a stabilizing influence on Douglas's increasingly erratic behavior. I had begun to trust Marcus. When Douglas drank heavily or became violent, Marcus would sometimes arrive unexpectedly and manage to calm his brother down. He never witnessed Douglas's abuse directly, but I suspected he knew something was wrong in our household. On March 22, 1963, Marcus visited while Douglas was working late at the mine. Mother was also at work, leaving Emma and me alone with him. I was helping Emma with arithmetic homework at our kitchen table when Marcus sat down across from us. "Sarah, I need to tell you something important." Marcus said, his voice unusually serious. "I've been watching how Douglas treats you and Emma, and I'm concerned." My heart began racing. Finally, someone was acknowledging what I had been experiencing for months. "He hits us," I said quietly, glancing toward Emma to make sure she was focused on her homework and not listening. "He gets drunk and violent. He's also been trying to get Emma alone, and it makes me very uncomfortable." Marcus nodded gravely. "I suspected as much. Douglas has problems that go back many years. He wasn't always like this, but something changed him." "What kind of problems?" I asked. Marcus glanced around nervously before speaking. "He was in some legal trouble several years ago. Nothing violent," he added quickly. "But it left him bitter and angry. He started drinking more and his temper got worse." I felt a surge of hope. Marcus clearly knew about Douglas's criminal past, and he seemed willing to help us. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "Your family came into some money when your father died, didn't it? Some kind of settlement from the construction company." I was surprised by this question. "Yes, there was a settlement. Mother keeps it in a special savings account for Emma's college fund and emergencies." Marcus's expression became even more serious. "I think Douglas knows about that money. He's been asking me questions about bank accounts and how someone might access another person's savings. I'm worried he married your mother for financial reasons, not because he loves her." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. The idea that Douglas had deliberately targeted our vulnerable family for money made his behavior even more calculated and evil than I had imagined. "What should I do?" I asked Marcus desperately. "Mother won't believe me if I tell her Douglas is dangerous. She thinks he loves us. Keep documenting everything like you've been doing," Marcus said, and I was shocked that he knew about my notebook. "I've seen you writing things down, and that's smart, but also be very careful. If Douglas discovers you're keeping records, he might become even more dangerous." Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. "This is for a lawyer friend of mine, Robert Chen. If things get worse, call him. He specializes in helping families in difficult situations." I tucked the card into my pocket, feeling grateful to finally have an adult ally who understood what was happening in our house. "There's one more thing," Marcus said as he prepared to leave. "That anonymous letter you received a few weeks ago, I think I know who sent it. A woman has been calling the garage where I work asking questions about Douglas. She said she was trying to protect another family from making the same mistake she made." "What mistake?" I asked. "She didn't give details, but she mentioned that Douglas had hurt her daughter. I think she's been trying to warn families about him." After Marcus left, I felt both hopeful and terrified. On one hand, I now had confirmation that Douglas was truly dangerous and that other adults were aware of his criminal behavior. On the other hand, I realized that Douglas's motivations were even more complex and sinister than simple violence. He was systematically targeting our family for both sexual abuse and financial theft. That night, I added Marcus's revelations to my notebook, along with the lawyer's contact information. I also began paying closer attention to Douglas's interest in our family's financial affairs. What I didn't know was that Marcus Warner was playing a much more complicated and dangerous game than I could have imagined. Throughout the spring and summer of 1963, Douglas's behavior became increasingly aggressive and calculated. Armed with Marcus's warnings about Douglas's financial motives, I began observing my stepfather's interactions with Mother more carefully. Douglas had indeed been pressuring Mother about her savings account. He suggested they should combine their finances completely and move her settlement money into a joint account for easier management. He also volunteered to handle all the family's banking, claiming his experience with business finances would help them earn better interest. Mother resisted these suggestions, which made Douglas increasingly frustrated and violent. His drinking escalated, and he began staying out late several nights per week without explanation. When Mother questioned these absences, Douglas would explode into rage, accusing her of being suspicious and ungrateful after everything he had done for our family. The violence against Emma and me also intensified. Douglas hit me at least twice per week for infractions as minor as speaking too loudly or leaving a book on the living room table. He began requiring Emma to report her daily activities to him in detail, asking inappropriate questions about her interactions with other children and her developing body. Most disturbing were Douglas's attempts to isolate Emma from my protection. He started insisting that Emma needed private time with him to discuss important growing-up matters that I was too immature to understand. He also began criticizing my care of Emma, telling Mother that I was overly protective and preventing Emma from bonding properly with her new father. I continued documenting everything in my notebook, which had grown to over 60 pages of detailed observations. I also began taking more photographs of injuries when possible, hiding the camera film in various locations around our house. Marcus continued visiting regularly, always asking about our welfare and offering gentle support. I began sharing more details with him about Douglas's escalating abuse, trusting that he would help us when the situation became unbearable. "You're being very brave," Marcus told me during a conversation in early July. "Keep collecting evidence, and when the time is right, we'll make sure Douglas faces consequences for what he's doing." But Marcus also began asking strange questions that made me uncomfortable. He wanted to know specific details about Mother's work schedule, our daily routines, and whether we had any relatives who visited regularly. He also asked about our house's layout, particularly the basement, where Douglas spent so much time drinking. On July 30th, 1963, Marcus made a request that alarmed me. Sarah, I need you to do something that might seem odd," he said during one of his visits. "I want you to find out exactly how much money your mother has in her settlement account. Douglas has been asking me about large financial transactions, and I think he's planning something." "What kind of something?" I asked. "I'm not sure yet, but if he's planning to steal your mother's money, we need to know how much is at stake." That night, I searched through Mother's personal papers and found bank statements showing that she had $8,347 in her settlement account, a substantial sum in 1963. I reported this information to Marcus during his next visit. What I didn't realize was that Marcus was reporting everything I told him directly to Douglas. The crisis came to a head on August 14, 1963, when Mother announced she would be visiting her sister in Flagstaff for the weekend. I begged her not to go, claiming that Emma had been having nightmares and needed her mother's comfort. Douglas will take excellent care of you girls, Mother said firmly. You need to learn to trust your stepfather, Sarah. Your constant suspicion is creating tension in our marriage. As Mother packed her overnight bag, Douglas watched with an expression I had never seen before. Cold, calculating satisfaction. He was finally going to have Emma and me completely alone for 48 hours. That evening, after Mother left for Flagstaff, Douglas came home from work more intoxicated than I had ever seen him. But this wasn't the sloppy, stumbling drunkenness I was accustomed to. This was deliberate, controlled intoxication. Douglas had been drinking just enough to lower his inhibitions while maintaining his physical coordination. Girls, he called from the living room, come down here. It's time we had a family meeting about some new house rules. Emma and I came downstairs cautiously. Douglas was sitting in Father's old armchair holding a glass of whiskey and staring at us with predatory intensity. Sarah, you've been causing problems in this family for too long, he said, his voice steady and menacing. Tonight that's going to stop. Emma and I are going to spend some quality father-daughter time together while you learn to mind your own business. Emma needs to do her homework and go to bed, I said, positioning myself between Douglas and my sister. Emma will do what I tell her to do, Douglas replied, standing up from the chair. And you will go to your room and stay there until I say otherwise. When I didn't move, Douglas set down his drink and walked toward us. I could see the violence in his eyes and knew this was going to be different from his previous attacks. Run upstairs, Emma, I said quietly. Lock your door and don't come out no matter what you hear. Emma, sensing the danger in Douglas's approach, ran toward the stairs. Douglas tried to grab her as she passed, but I stepped into his path and pushed him away from her with both hands. Douglas's response was to punch me in the face harder than he had ever hit me before. I heard my nose break with a wet crunching sound, and blood immediately began streaming down my face and onto my white blouse. The pain was so intense that bright white lights flashed behind my eyes. That's for 12 months of interference, Douglas said, grabbing me by both shoulders and shaking me violently. Now I'm going upstairs to spend time with Emma, and you're going to stay down here and think about how your behavior brought this on both of you. As Douglas turned toward the stairs, I made the decision that would save Emma's life and change mine forever. Despite my broken nose and the blood pouring down my face, I grabbed the heavy crystal vase from our hallway table, a wedding gift that had belonged to Mother's parents. Douglas, I called out. When he turned to face me, I threw the vase with every ounce of strength in my 15-year-old body. It struck him directly in the center of his forehead, and he fell backward onto our wooden floor like a toppled statue. For 4 terrifying seconds, I thought I had killed him. Then I saw his chest rising and falling, and I knew we had maybe 2 minutes to escape before he regained consciousness. I ran upstairs and found Emma hiding under her bed, crying with terror. We have to leave right now, I told her, pulling her out and grabbing clothes from her dresser. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip anything. We're climbing out your window and going to Mrs. Patterson's house. Sarah, your face is covered in blood, Emma whispered, starting to cry harder when she saw my condition. Douglas hurt me, and he was going to hurt you too, I explained, helping her put on shoes with trembling fingers. Mrs. Patterson will call the police, and they'll arrest Douglas so he can never hurt us again. Emma's bedroom window opened onto the roof of our back porch. I had practiced this escape route multiple times over the past months, knowing we might someday need to leave quickly and quietly. I helped Emma climb through the window first, then followed with our makeshift bag of clothes. From inside the house, I could hear Douglas groaning and moving around. We had perhaps 90 seconds before he recovered enough to come after us. We climbed down the wooden trellis that supported Mother's rose vines, though the thorns scratched our arms and legs as we descended. Once we reached the ground, I grabbed the glass jar containing our emergency money from its hiding place behind the garden shed. Mrs. Patterson, our 70-year-old neighbor, had been a friend to our family since before Emma was born. When she opened her front door at 8:43 p.m. and saw my bloody face and Emma's terrified expression, she immediately understood that something terrible had happened. "Dear God, what has that man done to you?" Mrs. Patterson said, guiding me to her kitchen sink and pressing a clean dish towel against my still bleeding nose. "Douglas has been hurting us for almost a year," I explained rapidly, knowing we didn't have much time. "Tonight he broke my nose and said he was going to hurt Emma. I hit him with a vase to stop him, but he'll wake up soon and come looking for us." Mrs. Patterson called the Phoenix Police Department while I sat at her kitchen table holding the towel against my face and showing her my notebook full of documented incidents. "How long has this been happening?" Mrs. Patterson asked, gently reading through several pages of my careful handwriting. 11 months, I replied. "I wrote everything down because I knew someday we would need proof of what he was doing." Phoenix police officers. James Rodriguez and Linda Morrison arrived at Mrs. Patterson's house 22 minutes after her emergency call. They spoke to Emma and me with remarkable patience and kindness, taking photographs of my injuries and listening carefully to everything I told them about Douglas's pattern of abuse. "This notebook is extraordinary evidence," Officer Rodriguez said, reading through my documentation. "Most domestic violence cases fail because victims can't prove what happened to them, but you've provided dates, time-specific incidents, and even photographs. This is exactly what prosecutors need to build a strong case." When the officers went to our house to arrest Douglas, they found him sitting on our front porch with a blood-soaked towel wrapped around his head. The vase had given him a severe concussion, but he was conscious and coherent enough to be arrested on charges of child abuse, domestic violence, and assault. Officer Morrison returned to tell us that Douglas was in custody at the county jail where he would remain until his trial. "He won't be getting out on bail," she explained, sitting across from Emma and me at Mrs. Patterson's kitchen table. "The judge considered him a flight risk and a danger to your family. But we're going to need you both to be very brave and tell your story to prosecutors and possibly to a jury. Can you do that?" I nodded, despite the pain in my broken nose. "I'll tell them everything. I have it all written down." Emma, who had been mostly silent during the evening's chaos, finally spoke up. "Will Sarah get in trouble for hitting Douglas with the vase?" she asked Officer Morrison. "Absolutely not, sweetheart," Officer Morrison replied gently. "Sarah was protecting you and herself from someone who was trying to hurt you both. She's a hero, not a criminal." As we spent our first night of freedom at Mrs. Patterson's house, I had no idea that the most shocking revelations about Douglas were yet to come. Mother returned from Flagstaff the next morning to find Emma and me staying with Mrs. Patterson and Douglas in jail awaiting trial. Her initial reaction was disbelief and anger, directed entirely at me. "How could you attack Douglas like that?" she demanded, pacing frantically around Mrs. Patterson's living room. "He could have been killed, and these wild stories you're telling about him hurting you? Douglas loves you girls. He would never harm children." I handed Mother my notebook and the evidence I had collected over 11 months. I told her about the anonymous warning letter and Marcus's revelations about Douglas's financial motives. I explained about Douglas's attempts to isolate Emma and his escalating violence against both of us. Mother read through my notebook for over 2 hours, occasionally stopping to ask specific questions about dates or incidents. When she finished, she sat in complete silence for nearly an hour, staring at the pages of documentation, with tears streaming down her face. "I failed you both completely," she finally whispered, looking at Emma and me with an expression of horror and self-recrimination. "I was so desperate to have financial security and a father figure for you girls that I ignored obvious danger signs. I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." Detective Robert Chen was assigned as the lead investigator for our case. Within 48 hours of Douglas's arrest, Detective Chen had uncovered information that shocked everyone involved in the investigation. Douglas's real name was Douglas Brennan, and he had been using the false identity Douglas Warner since his release from Arizona State Prison in 1961. He had served 4 years for sexually abusing an 8-year-old girl named Regina Flores in Tucson in 1957. But Detective Chen discovered something even more disturbing about Douglas's current situation. Douglas owed over $12,000 in gambling debts to dangerous people in Las Vegas, and he had been planning to steal Mother's settlement money to pay off these debts before disappearing with a new false identity. Douglas Brennan specifically targeted your family because of your father's death and the settlement money, Detective Chen explained during a meeting with Mother and me. He researched vulnerable families through public records of wrongful death lawsuits, then created a false identity to gain access to your mother and her savings account. Detective Chen also solved the mystery of the anonymous warning letter. Margaret Flores, the mother of Douglas's previous victim, had been tracking Douglas's activities since his release from prison. She had discovered his false identity and his plan to target our family, then spent weeks trying to find our address to warn us. Margaret Flores has been following Douglas for 2 years, documenting his movements and trying to prevent him from hurting other children, Detective Chen said. She wrote that letter because she couldn't live with the knowledge that another little girl might suffer what her daughter Regina experienced. Margaret Flores agreed to travel from Tucson to testify about Douglas's previous crimes and his pattern of targeting vulnerable families. Regina, now 14 years old, also courageously agreed to testify about what Douglas had done to her 6 years earlier. District Attorney Michael Henderson was confident about the strength of our case from the beginning. We have detailed documentation, physical evidence, witness testimony, proof of previous similar crimes, and evidence of financial fraud, he told Mother and me. Douglas Brennan is going to prison for a very long time. However, Douglas had hired Robert Carlyle, an expensive defense attorney who specialized in discrediting child witnesses. Carlyle's strategy was to portray me as a disturbed, jealous teenager who had fabricated abuse allegations to destroy my mother's marriage. But the most shocking revelation came when Detective Chen investigated Marcus Warner's background. Marcus was not Douglas's brother at all. His real name was Marcus Brennan, and he was Douglas's cousin and criminal partner. Marcus had been helping Douglas identify target families and gather information about their financial assets. Every conversation I had with Marcus, every detail I had shared about our family's routines and Mother's bank account had been reported directly to Douglas. Marcus Brennan has been working with Douglas for over 3 years, Detective Chen explained. They developed this system of targeting widowed mothers with settlement money. Marcus would gain the family's trust while Douglas courted the mother. Then they would coordinate stealing the family's assets before moving to a new location. The realization that I had been manipulated and betrayed by someone I trusted was almost as devastating as Douglas's abuse itself. Marcus had seemed like my only adult ally, but he had actually been helping Douglas plan our family's destruction. This betrayal would become a crucial element in the prosecution's case, demonstrating the calculated, premeditated nature of Douglas's crimes against our family. Douglas Brennan's trial began on October 15, 1963, in Maricopa County Superior Court. Judge Patricia Williams, who had built a reputation for being tough on defendants accused of crimes against children, presided over the proceedings. When I testified, I spoke for nearly 5 hours over 2 days, describing in detail how Douglas had systematically escalated his abuse while planning to steal our family's money. I read specific entries from my notebook providing exact dates and descriptions of violent incidents, financial manipulation, and inappropriate behavior toward Emma. Why did you keep such detailed records?" District Attorney Henderson asked during my direct examination. I knew that adults don't always believe children when they report abuse, I replied, looking directly at the 12-member jury. I also learned from the anonymous letter that Douglas had hurt children before, so I wanted to have concrete proof of what he was doing to our family. Defense attorney Carlyle attempted to portray me as vindictive and mentally unstable during his cross-examination, suggesting that I had fabricated the abuse allegations out of jealousy and resentment. "Isn't it true that you never wanted your mother to remarry?" Carlyle asked. "I wanted my mother to marry a good man who would treat our family with love and respect," I replied calmly. Douglas Brennan was a violent criminal who was planning to sexually abuse my sister and steal our father's settlement money. But you attacked Mr. Brennan with a heavy vase that could have killed him, didn't you? I used whatever force was necessary to protect my 8-year-old sister from being raped by a convicted child molester, I said, looking directly at Douglas. I would make exactly the same choice again without any hesitation. Emma's testimony was brief, but devastatingly effective. She described Douglas's inappropriate touching and his attempts to isolate her from my protection, speaking in such innocent, specific terms that no one could doubt her truthfulness. Regina Flores also testified about Douglas's previous crimes, providing detailed accounts that paralleled his behavior toward Emma. Margaret Flores explained how she had tracked Douglas after his release from prison and warned our family because she couldn't bear the thought of another child suffering as Regina had. Then came the testimony that shocked everyone in the courtroom, including Douglas. District Attorney Henderson called Marcus Brennan as a prosecution witness. Marcus had been arrested 3 weeks after Douglas and offered a plea bargain in exchange for his testimony against his cousin. Marcus admitted to everything: the false identity scheme, the systematic targeting of widowed mothers, the financial fraud planning, and his role in gaining our family's trust while reporting our vulnerabilities to Douglas. Douglas specifically chose the Mitchell family because of Robert Mitchell's death and the settlement money. Marcus testified, refusing to look at Douglas during his testimony. We researched wrongful death lawsuits through public records, then created a false background for Douglas to make him appear respectable to Mrs. Mitchell. Marcus also revealed the full extent of Douglas's gambling debts and his plan to disappear with mother's money after abusing Emma. Douglas planned to drain Mrs. Mitchell's bank account within 6 months, then disappear with a new false identity, Marcus said. He had done this twice before in other states, but this was the first time he had specifically targeted a family with children for other purposes. Douglas's reaction to Marcus's betrayal was explosive. He began shouting and had to be physically restrained by bailiffs as Marcus continued his testimony. "You lying bastard!" Douglas screamed. "We had an agreement. You were supposed to support my story." Judge Williams ordered Douglas removed from the courtroom, and Marcus completed his testimony in Douglas's absence. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 17 minutes before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: multiple counts of child abuse, domestic violence, attempted sexual abuse of a minor, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Judge Williams sentenced Douglas to 22 years in prison, the maximum sentence possible under Arizona law at the time. She specifically noted Douglas's use of false identity, his systematic targeting of vulnerable families, and his pattern of repeat offenses as justification for the harsh sentence. Douglas Brennan represents a calculated predator who poses a continuing danger to society, Judge Williams said during sentencing. This court finds his crimes to be particularly heinous due to their premeditated nature and his exploitation of a grieving family's vulnerability. As bailiffs led Douglas away in shackles, he turned to stare at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. "Yes, it is," I whispered back, feeling truly safe for the first time in almost 2 years. Marcus received a sentence of 8 years in prison for his role in the conspiracy, but he would serve only 4 years before being released on parole. Douglas's conviction brought our family safety and peace, but the legal proceedings continued for several more years. His attorney immediately filed appeals, arguing that Judge Williams had improperly allowed testimony about Douglas's previous crimes and that Marcus's plea bargain testimony was unreliable. For 4 years, we lived with the uncertainty of whether Douglas's conviction might be overturned by higher courts. The appeals process was emotionally exhausting, requiring us to relive our trauma repeatedly through legal briefs and court hearings. During this time, Mother began intensive counseling with Dr. Patricia Hendricks to understand how she had missed obvious signs of Douglas's deception and abuse. She also started volunteering with the Phoenix Crisis Center for Women, helping other domestic violence survivors navigate the legal system. "I can't undo the terrible mistakes I made," Mother told me one evening as we prepared dinner together. "But I can help other women learn to recognize predators before they destroy their families." Emma struggled significantly with anxiety and nightmares following our ordeal. Dr. Hendricks worked with Emma twice weekly, teaching her coping strategies for managing trauma responses and rebuilding her sense of safety and trust. I channeled my energy into academic excellence and career planning. I maintained perfect grades throughout high school and began researching social work programs determined to dedicate my life to protecting other children from predators like Douglas. In March 1967, the Arizona Court of Appeals unanimously upheld Douglas's conviction, rejecting all of his attorney's arguments. The court specifically praised my documentation methods and noted that testimony about Douglas's previous crimes was properly admitted to show his pattern of criminal behavior. The defendant's systematic exploitation of vulnerable families demonstrates a clear modus operandi that fully supports the charges in this case, the appeals court wrote in its decision. Douglas remained in Arizona State Prison until January 1976, when he was released after serving 12 years and 4 months of his 22-year sentence. Prison overcrowding and good behavior credits allowed him early release despite the violent nature of his crimes. We were notified of Douglas's release by Detective Chen, who assured us that Douglas would be closely monitored by parole officers and prohibited from having any contact with our family. He's required to register as a sex offender and cannot live within 1,000 feet of schools or playgrounds, Detective Chen explained. If he violates any conditions of his parole, he'll be returned to prison immediately. Douglas moved to California after his release, apparently using his real name for the first time since the 1950s. We occasionally received updates about his activities through law enforcement contacts, but he never attempted to contact our family directly. On September 14, 1978, Detective Chen called with news that brought our long nightmare to a permanent end. Douglas Brennan had been killed in a car accident in Los Angeles while driving under the influence of alcohol. He had crashed his car into a concrete barrier on Interstate 405, dying instantly. When I told Emma about Douglas's death, she had a surprisingly mature reaction for a 23-year-old woman. "I'm not happy that someone died," Emma said quietly. "But I'm relieved that he can never hurt another child the way he hurt us." I felt a complex mixture of emotions, relief that Douglas could never harm another family's sadness for all the lives he had already destroyed, and a strange sense of closure knowing that this chapter of our lives was finally permanently finished. Marcus Brennan was released from prison in 1967 and moved to Nevada, where he apparently abandoned his criminal activities and found legitimate work as a mechanic. He never contacted our family or attempted to continue his partnership with Douglas. With Douglas permanently gone from our lives, Emma and I began the long but ultimately successful process of healing from our childhood trauma. This healing required professional help, mutual support, and a determination to build better lives despite what we had endured. Emma graduated from Arizona State University in 1978 with degrees in elementary education and child psychology. She married Michael Torres, a kind accountant she met in college in 1979. They moved to Tucson and had 2 children, Carlos in 1981 and Sophia in 1983. Emma became an extraordinarily protective and loving mother, using her experiences to ensure her children's safety without letting trauma dominate their childhood. "I know exactly what warning signs to watch for," Emma told me, as we watched Carlos and Sophia playing safely in her backyard. "My children will grow up feeling secure because I'll never ignore my instincts the way Mother did." I earned my bachelor's degree in social work from the University of Arizona in 1975, followed by my master's degree in 1977. I began working with Maricopa County Child Protective Services as a caseworker specializing in abuse investigations and family reunification services. My personal experience with abuse combined with my systematic documentation skills made me exceptionally effective at building strong cases against child abusers and helping families heal from trauma. In 1979, I met Jonathan Thompson, a police detective who specialized in crimes against children. Jonathan had heard about my innovative documentation methods through professional contacts and specifically requested my collaboration on several complex cases. Jonathan understood and respected my dedication to protecting vulnerable children. He was patient with my trust issues and never pressured me to discuss my past before I was ready to share those experiences. We began dating in 1980 and married in 1982. Although medical complications from my childhood injuries prevented us from having biological children, we dedicated our careers to protecting other people's children from predators and abusers. Throughout the 1980s, I developed comprehensive training programs for social workers and law enforcement officers on documentation techniques for domestic violence investigations. These programs, based directly on my childhood experiences, taught professionals how to help child victims prepare evidence that would result in successful prosecutions. Sarah's methods have revolutionized how we handle these cases in Arizona. My supervisor wrote in my 1985 performance evaluation. Her systematic approach to evidence collection has increased our conviction rate from 34% to 82% over the past 5 years. Regina Flores, who had testified against Douglas during his trial, became a victims' rights attorney specializing in child abuse cases. She contacted me in 1987 to tell me how our successful prosecution had inspired her career choice. Testifying against Douglas taught me that children's voices matter and that justice is achievable when survivors are prepared and supported, Regina explained during a phone conversation. I've dedicated my practice to making sure other abuse survivors get the justice and protection they deserve. Our mother, Helen, remained active in domestic violence advocacy until her death from heart disease in 1991. She never remarried, choosing instead to dedicate her remaining years to helping other women recognize and escape dangerous relationships. Margaret Flores also remained in contact with our family. Her determination to warn us about Douglas had literally saved Emma's life, and possibly mine as well. Margaret continued tracking and reporting on released sex offenders throughout Arizona until her death in 1989. Margaret Flores was a true hero, I said at her memorial service. She couldn't protect her own daughter from Douglas, but her courage and persistence protected mine. In 1990, I made the decision that would define the rest of my life and career. Using savings from my social work salary and Jonathan's police pension, I opened the Crisis Support Center on 4th Street in Tucson, where we had moved when Jonathan was promoted to police chief. The Crisis Support Center provided comprehensive services for domestic violence and child abuse survivors. But our most innovative program was our documentation training system. Based directly on the methods I had used to protect Emma and build evidence against Douglas, we taught survivors how to safely collect and preserve evidence of abuse. Our documentation training covered practical skills like photographing injuries, preserving threatening messages, keeping detailed incident logs, and preparing for court testimony. We also taught safety protocols for hiding evidence from abusers and working with law enforcement to build strong cases. Sarah's documentation methods saved her family and put a dangerous predator in prison, our training materials explained. These same techniques can help you achieve safety and justice for your family. Regina Flores joined our board of directors in 1992, providing legal expertise and helping us develop protocols for supporting survivors through court proceedings. Her experience as both a survivor and an attorney made her invaluable in bridging the gap between emotional healing and legal justice. In 1994, we received a letter that demonstrated the far-reaching impact of our story and methods. Kevin Cox, a police officer in Los Angeles, wrote to tell us how our case had inspired him to become a child abuse investigator. I was 12 years old in 1975 when I read newspaper articles about Sarah Mitchell's documentation methods. Kevin wrote, "My 6-year-old sister Amanda was being abused by our mother's boyfriend, and I started keeping a detailed notebook just like Sarah did. That evidence put our abuser in prison and saved my sister's life." Kevin visited our center in 1995 and explained how our story had been featured in law enforcement training materials throughout California. Amanda had become a child psychologist specializing in trauma recovery, directly inspired by our family's successful transformation of victimization into advocacy. "Your courage gave us a roadmap for fighting back," Kevin told me during his visit. "Amanda and I both chose careers protecting children because we learned from your example that survivors can become protectors." By 2000, the Crisis Support Center had helped over 1-800 families escape abusive situations. We had trained law enforcement officers in 12 states on evidence collection techniques. Most importantly, we had helped hundreds of children find their voices and learned that they possessed power to protect themselves from dangerous adults. Emma retired from teaching in 2005, but continued volunteering at the center, working specifically with children who had experienced trauma similar to ours. Her own children had become successful adults, Carlos as a pediatrician and Sophia as a social worker, both dedicating their careers to helping children in honor of their mother's experiences. Aunt Sarah saved my life when I was 8 years old, Emma often told visitors to our center. She taught me that even children have power to fight back against people who try to hurt them, and that lesson has shaped everything good in my life since then. Jonathan retired from law enforcement in 2003, but remained active as a consultant on child abuse cases throughout Arizona and California. Together, we wrote training manuals that became standard resources for police departments and child protective services agencies throughout the Southwest. In 2008, I received the National Victim Services Award in recognition of my work with abuse survivors. During my acceptance speech in Washington, D.C., I spoke about the importance of believing children and teaching them documentation skills for self-protection. Every child deserves someone who will listen to them, believe them, and fight for them, I told the audience of federal officials and victim advocates. Sometimes that person is a parent, teacher, or police officer. Sometimes it's an older sister with a notebook and the determination to document truth. But every child has more power than they realize to protect themselves and others when they're taught proper methods and supported by caring adults. Today, at 78 years old, I continue working part-time at the Crisis Support Center, though I have transferred daily operations to Dr. Maria Santos, a former client who earned her PhD in trauma psychology and returned to help other survivors. Emma and I remain extraordinarily close, speaking on the phone every morning and spending holidays together with her extended family. We both occasionally struggle with anxiety and hypervigilance related to our childhood experiences, but we have learned healthy coping strategies and continue supporting each other through difficult moments. The physical scars from Douglas's abuse disappeared decades ago, but the emotional growth that resulted from surviving those experiences has shaped everything I have accomplished since. I learned that children are not powerless, that careful preparation can overcome brute force, and that justice is possible when survivors have courage to speak up and wisdom to document their experiences systematically. The spiral notebook I kept as a 15-year-old girl is now displayed in a frame in my office at the Crisis Support Center. Visitors often ask about it, and I share the story of how $3 worth of paper and ink became the foundation for a lifetime dedicated to protecting children from predators. Documentation saved Emma's life and mine. I explain to clients learning our evidence collection methods. These same techniques can save your life and your children's lives if you're willing to be patient and systematic about gathering proof. Perhaps the most meaningful legacy of our experience has been our annual Freedom Day celebrations, held every August 15th from 1985 to 2020. These gatherings brought together our extended family crisis support center staff and clients and other survivors whose lives had been touched by our story. Freedom Day celebrations included Regina Flores and her family, Kevin and Amanda Cox, dozens of families we had helped through the center, and law enforcement officers who had implemented our documentation training methods. We would share survival stories, enjoy Emma's homemade tamales, and remind each other that healing is possible and that survivors can transform their pain into protection for others. "We're not celebrating what Douglas did to us," Emma explained to her grandson during our 2019 gathering. "We're celebrating our courage to fight back and our determination to ensure that other children never have to experience what we survived." The ripple effects of our successful fight against Douglas continue expanding more than 60 years after that terrifying night in 1963. Our documentation methods are now taught in social work programs and police academies throughout North America. Our story has been featured in training materials used by child protective services agencies in 15 countries. Most importantly, we have helped create a new generation of survivors who understand their own power to document abuse, seek help, and protect other vulnerable children. Every family we have helped has gone on to help others in their own way, creating an ever-expanding network of protection and support. When Douglas died in that car accident in 1978, I felt relief that he could never hurt another child. But when Amanda Cox contacted us in 2018 to tell us she had become a leading researcher in childhood trauma recovery, I felt something much more powerful than relief. I felt proud that our survival had inspired others to dedicate their lives to healing and protection. Sarah and Emma proved that children can successfully fight back against adult predators, Amanda wrote in her email to us. Kevin and I survived our own abuse because we learned from your example that documentation and courage can overcome even the most dangerous situations. Now I spend my career teaching other professionals how to help child survivors heal and thrive. I share this detailed account of our family's ordeal, not to relive painful memories, but to provide hope and practical guidance to anyone facing similar circumstances. If you are currently in an abusive situation, please know that you are not alone and that escape is possible with proper preparation and support. The most important lessons I have learned are these. First, trust your instincts about dangerous adults. Douglas appeared charming and helpful to most people, but something about him made me uncomfortable from the beginning. Children and teenagers often sense danger before adults recognize it. If someone makes you feel unsafe, trust that feeling and take protective action. Second, document everything systematically and safely. Keep detailed records of dates, times, witnesses, and specific incidents. Take photographs of injuries when possible. Save threatening messages or communications as evidence. Hide your documentation in multiple secure locations where your abuser cannot find and destroy it. Third, seek help from multiple sources. Don't rely on just one adult to believe and protect you. Contact teachers, school counselors, police officers, relatives, neighbors, or domestic violence organizations. Keep asking for help until someone takes action to protect you. Fourth, understand that abusers often work systematically. Douglas didn't randomly choose our family. He researched vulnerable targets and created a false identity to gain access to us. Predators often appear helpful and charming initially, then gradually escalate their control and violence. Recognizing these patterns can help you identify danger earlier. Fifth, know that healing is possible but requires patience and professional support. Emma and I both struggled with anxiety, depression, and trust issues for years after our experiences. But we found ways to transform our trauma into purpose through therapy, education, meaningful work, and loving relationships with trustworthy people. Practical steps for current abuse survivors. Start documenting immediately, no matter how minor incidents might seem. Keep evidence in safe locations where abusers cannot access it. Photograph injuries and ask medical professionals to document abuse-related injuries in your medical records. Save all threatening text messages, emails, voicemails, or written communications. Report abuse to multiple authorities, school officials, police, child protective services, domestic violence, hotlines. Work with professionals to develop a safety plan for leaving dangerous situations. Remember that leaving can be the most dangerous time, so careful planning is essential. Never give up hope that your situation can improve. For adults who suspect child abuse, listen carefully when children report concerning adult behavior. Look for signs of unexplained injuries, behavioral changes, or fear of specific people. Remember that children rarely fabricate abuse allegations. False reports are statistically extremely rare. Report suspected abuse immediately to Child Protective Services and law enforcement support survivors by believing them and helping them access professional services. Avoid asking, "Why didn't you report sooner?" Focus on providing safety and support now. For survivors who have escaped abusive situations, consider how your experience might help others still trapped in dangerous situations. Whether through volunteering, mentoring, advocacy, or simply sharing your story, you can provide hope to other survivors. Professional counseling can be invaluable for processing trauma and developing healthy relationships. Remember that healing is not linear. Difficult days are normal and don't represent failure. Building trust with safe people takes time but is possible and worthwhile. Final reflections. The Power of One Voice, 2025. As I complete this memoir in my office overlooking the Crisis Support Center's playground, I can see Emma teaching a group of young mothers how to create safety plans for leaving abusive relationships. At 70 years old, she remains passionate about protecting children and helping families escape the kind of nightmare we survived. The frightened 15-year-old girl who threw a crystal vase at her stepfather could never have imagined that this desperate act of protection would lead to a lifetime of meaningful work, saving thousands of other children. But that is exactly what happened, demonstrating what becomes possible when survivors choose to transform their pain into purpose. Douglas Brennan has been dead for 47 years, but the lessons we learned from defeating him continue protecting children today. Our documentation methods are taught in universities and training academies worldwide. The Crisis Support Center has helped over 4,500 families escape abusive situations and trained more than 12,000 professionals in evidence collection and survivor support techniques. Most importantly, we have helped create a new understanding that children are not powerless victims, but potential protectors who can learn to document abuse, seek help effectively, and fight back against even the most dangerous predators. Every year on August 15th, Emma and I visit our parents' graves and tell our father about the work we have accomplished and the lives we have saved. We believe he would be proud that his daughters learned to fight against darkness and spent their lives bringing light to others who desperately needed it. Regina Flores, now retired, but still volunteering with survivor advocacy organizations, recently told me that our successful prosecution of Douglas was the first time she had seen a child abuser face real consequences for his crimes. "Your family proved that justice was possible," she said. "That knowledge changed everything for me and for countless other survivors." The ripple effects continue expanding in ways we could never have predicted. Kevin Cox was recently promoted to Chief of Police in Los Angeles, where he oversees all child abuse investigations for the nation's second-largest city. Amanda Cox has published groundbreaking research on childhood resilience that is used by trauma therapists internationally. Dozens of other survivors we helped through the Crisis Support Center have become teachers, social workers, police officers, nurses, and advocates who carry forward our message that survival and healing are possible. This is the true victory. Not just that Emma and I survived and healed, but that our survival created pathways for thousands of other children to escape dangerous situations and build successful, meaningful lives. My name is Sarah Mitchell Thompson. I am 78 years old and have been married for 43 years to Jonathan Thompson, a man who treats me with kindness, respect, and unwavering support. I have dedicated my career to protecting vulnerable children and helping abuse survivors find their voices, their strength, and their paths to justice and healing. This is my story of survival, courage, documentation, and hope. If my experiences can help even one child escape abuse, find the strength to speak up, or learn that fighting back is possible, then every moment of pain and every year of hard work has been worthwhile. The Arizona sun that witnessed my darkest moments also witnessed my greatest triumphs. It continues to shine on the Crisis Support Center, on Emma's grandchildren playing safely in their backyard, on Regina's successful advocacy work, on Kevin's police leadership, on Amanda's healing research, and on the hundreds of families who have found safety and hope through our shared determination to protect the innocent. This is not just my story. It is a story of what becomes possible when survivors refuse to remain silent, when communities choose to believe and protect their children, when justice systems work as they should, and when trauma is transformed into triumph through courage, documentation, and unwavering determination to help others. It is above all a story of hope. And hope, as I have learned through 78 years of living, is indeed the most powerful force in the world.